Do you want complete freedom to create your style? It all starts by mastering one thing. In this video, I'm going to explain how experimenting, trying different approaches, and applying your ideas creates this domino effect in developing your style. By the way, I'm Adam. I've been drawing for over 25 years, and now I help aspiring charcoal artists come off the grid method so they feel connected to their work, master proportions so they can take on those commissions, and develop their style so they have their own unique voice. Make sure you subscribe so don't miss out anytime I post a video about freehand drawing and expressive realism. Let's dive in. Lately, I've been experimenting with my work. For me, exploring and testing new approaches is a top priority in my workflow. Right now, I'm very much focused on how much can I simplify while still maintaining a sense of realism. What can I suggest and gesture to convey my subject's likeness while implying less but saying more? I came from a 20-year hyperrealism background where I religiously used the grid method. So I think for me there's a natural pendulum swing from hyperrealism, going as detailed and precise as possible, to just deconstructing it all and saying the most with as little as possible. And I couldn't be more intrigued and curious about it. And I think that's why I hold experimenting and exploring with my work so high in my priority list, because it keeps everything fresh and you're constantly following this trail of new experiences and bite-sized pieces of knowledge that will eventually lead you to those checkpoints within your drawing journey. In my program, we don't just focus on improving our technical side of drawing, even though that is something we really hone in on, because ultimately that gives us that freedom to experiment and navigate our way into developing our style. But we also focus on how we can develop our style as well. If you're serious about wanting to elevate your work to a professional level and building confidence as an artist, book a free call to learn more about my mentorship program. We'll create a personalized roadmap for you and see if working together aligns with your goals. Link is in the description. Now, I have a tendency of, when I get interested in something, I'll just dial all of my attention into that one thing to try and gain as much experience of it as possible so I can understand it, get better at it, and make sense of it. Usually I can't really focus on much else until I've got some kind of grasp on this new interest within my work. Recently, I felt a little spark of curiosity about simplicity and how to convey more with less. And what that meant, I wasn't entirely sure, to be honest with you. And that's where I was experimenting and exploring with my work, trying different materials, different charcoals, pencils, pastels, different applications, different approaches. I would draw showcase pieces and then purposely doing something to the drawing, knowing that it's quite likely going to quote unquote ruin the artwork. But I know at the same time, I kind of have to do that because it will give me a piece of the puzzle that I need in order to get to where I want to go. And when I'm in that area of just creating and discovering things, when I'm in that position where I almost have to sacrifice an artwork, it kind of feels like a bit of an unfair trade, because it feels like I've wasted a day. And knowing that I'm going to spend the day doing some artwork, and knowing at the end of that day I'm not going to have anything like physical in front of me to show for it. But it's not until you've done that for X amount of days that something then finally clicks and you find that piece of the puzzle that slots just perfectly into what you're trying to find. And that's exactly what this piece here is. This is that piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle, but it's that first piece that makes sense that I can now start to build around and develop in future pieces. This piece feels like that first stepping stone in a slightly new direction. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm not also going to be focusing on charcoal portraits that have more of a alla prima kind of feel to it, or just a nice traditional soft realistic portrait, because I still really enjoy doing them. And you know, they have their own lane in other aspects of what I want to achieve with my work. But they are also styles and areas that I kind of feel pretty comfortable with now, which is, you know, a great thing. But I also like learning new things. And this lane, this style of drawing, is something that actually makes me stop and think a bit more about what I'm doing rather than just going through the motions of it. And that's what draws me to keep exploring in this lane. To be honest with you, that's what keeps me exploring, period. Because I'm actually connecting with it more. And I feel the more you connect with your work, not only do you eventually create some of your best works, but it also creates this domino effect in motivation, inspiration, and just a deeper appreciation in the game of creating art. Now, if we compare this piece to, some of my other artworks, they aren't, completely different in style. They definitely have similar characteristics, but the nuances of them are different. The approach and the mentality is different. I actually drew this same portrait about a year and a half ago. And at that point, my focus was to create an accurate, realistic, soft portrait and exploring depth. And this portrait did exactly that. It gave me that concrete evidence of how to approach the fundamentals and when to introduce the darkest values into a portrait. Granted, every portrait is different, and some portraits I actually start putting in my dark values quite early on in the process. But that's depending on how I'm approaching it and what I want my end result to be. But in terms of showing the easiest and simplest way in building a portrait up accurately, and it's something I use within my program to show my students because it's such a great example of that. But I also find it interesting because you have the same portrait, but with two different mindsets, two different approaches, and have two different results. Now, if you would have asked me back then about that portrait, I would have told you that I feel very good about it. I have the likeness, it's accurate, it's pleasant to look at. However, if you would ask me now, I wouldn't say that I'm not happy with it, but it's just something that isn't really aligned what I want to achieve in my work anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a good piece or it's not a valuable piece. It just means that it's something that doesn't light me up anymore. But without that piece, I wouldn't actually be where I am right now, because the better you are at putting a portrait together and the more understanding you have of the fundamentals, the better you understand how you can take it apart. And that's basically what I'm doing in this piece here. I'm exploring how I can take it apart, and it's about being intentional and specific with certain areas to leave out and imply while still telling the whole story of the portrait. Also, the equipment that I'm using, as I know I'm going to get asked in the comments, I'm using Cretacolor charcoal powder. I'm using a charcoal sock that I made. That's just with a piece of fabric, some fluff, and then I just poured some of that charcoal powder into it. I use very cheap brushes. I think the whole set cost me about £5 at my local art shop. I use willow sticks, carbon pencils, and the paper that I'm using in this particular piece is Bristol Strathmore Smooth. And I tone the paper in between once I'm confident with my foundation, which puts in my base tone and also some texture as well. It's a journey, it's a process, What I wanted to achieve with my work a couple of years ago is different to what I want to achieve with my work now. And it'll be interesting. And I'm almost certain that in a couple of years' time, my focus will shift again. It will be on something slightly different. But I think as long as you're always focusing on and staying true to what you actually truly want to create, is that secret sauce in always feeling like you're progressing with your work. What I wanted to achieve a couple of years ago is completely different to what I want to achieve right now. Maybe not completely different, but I definitely have different goals. And I'm sure in a couple of years' time, it will continue to evolve as well. And I think that's it, isn't it? Like, as long as you're focusing on and you're staying true to what you genuinely want to create, that's the secret sauce in always feeling like you're progressing with your work. Even if in some of those phases it might feel stiff or stagnant, even if some of those phases your work may not look as good or as aesthetically pleasing, but it's still a necessary phase for you to go through in order for you to get to where you actually want to be. I think it's so easy just to fall into viewing and judging your work and your progression of where it is right now instead of the grand scheme of things. And don't get me wrong, you 100% should judge your work where it is right now, because that is how you progress. But I definitely feel that you should also view and judge your work in the grand scheme of things. Where it was before, maybe like a couple of years ago, to where it is now, and also where you want it to be. I'm guilty of doing it as well. I don't view my journey as much as I should in the grand scheme of things. Because I'm doing this full time, it's so easy for me to track what I'm doing on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis rather than the 6 months or 12 months apart. Which is why for me, seeing the old version of this drawing to what I'm creating here, I find it really interesting. At the time of creating that old version, I'm not fully aware of all those little stepping stones that I'm creating in the grand scheme of things. Is that making sense? And I think that's why I'm so conscious of this piece being a stepping stone, because I've already seen the transformation happen once, twice in fact. One of the reasons why I felt so unfulfilled with my work before, when I was focusing on hyperrealism, because I didn't allow myself to be creative and get messy, make mistakes, make those discoveries. When it comes to hyperrealism and using the grid method, it kind of takes all of those aspects and freedom away because it gives you a grid to work from. So it sets you up in a way that can be so precise, it minimizes everything else. And because you already know what the end result is going to be, it's just going to look exactly like the reference photo. For me, it didn't feel like there was a creative journey involved. It was just like running on a treadmill instead of hiking through the mountains. Yes, you are still doing that same journey. You're still getting that experience, but at the same time, you're not getting the experience of what that journey has to offer. Just like if you were to hike through the mountains. That mountain hike is a completely different experience compared to the treadmill. Even though you may have burned the same amount of calories, done the same amount of steps, the actual journey and the process is completely different. And part of me is almost grateful that I did get to a point where I was so unfulfilled with the old way that I was working, because it forced me to stop what I was doing and truly focus on what I actually wanted to achieve with my work. It set me up to focus on what I wasn't good at, which then allowed me to start experiencing something I was a lot more connected with, which gave me that freedom in creating the work that I want to create today. It has taught me the process of how to learn, not just learning new approaches, techniques, and mindset, but learning how to learn. That is an art form in itself. I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.